Hello, everybody. This is International Master Sam Shankland, and today I would like to talk about how to bust the less ambitious D4 systems. Well, not so much how to bust them. I mean, you can't exactly hope to get a winning position, but you can definitely get a playable position where you have good prospects of eventually winning the game if you play better than your opponent. Because I remember when I was a young player, or I guess I still am a young player, but when I was a much younger player, when I was 12 and 13, I was really annoyed when people would play openings like this one here. So knight f3, and then knight f6, and now this is bishop f4. This is called the London system, and it's notoriously solid. There's really no way to like break it. Essentially, White's plan is to play moves c3, e3, knight bd2, bishop e2 or d3, short castle h3, and White's position is unbelievably solid. It's almost impossible to make any headway against it, and his moves are easy to play. And Black has a weakness on the e5 square, which can be exploited in some cases. And I remember feeling like I was better than these players who were playing it, but their game was so easy to play, they just kept on getting good positions and a lot of the time beating me. So hopefully I can, if anybody else is having similar kinds of suffering, I can remedy this. So in this position after bishop f4, I would recommend playing c5. So after e3, which is the main move, I think, dc5 is possible, but my feeling is Black takes a little bit too much of the center. So something like knight c6, and okay, Black will play e6, bishop takes c5 pretty easily. It's not going to be amazing. It's not going to be like a winning position right away, but it should be certainly playable enough. Also, even a move queen a5 check might make some sense in order to take the pawn immediately and develop more of the center. Or I guess knight c6 to try to take with the bishop, but if they play a3, trying to play b4, maybe now you could play queen a5 check. There's many ways, but I think d takes c5 is not the most testing move. Usually White will play e3, trying to set up his ideal triangle. Now knight c6 and c3. So I should point out this is sort of the main position that you're going to see. You're going to probably see this probably 75-90% of the time if you play in this way against the London system. And I think it's a very interesting position. I think Black has good prospects if he knows what to do. But also another point is in this position after c3, knight c6, White has an extra option of playing d takes c5 here if he had played c3 first. Because now after dc5, Black's going to have a hard time winning this pawn back. But I think he has a very strong respite in e6, b4, and then a strong move knight to e4. The idea that he's now attacking the c3 pawn. White doesn't really have time to develop the b1 knight with a move like knight to d2 because he loses the c3 pawn. But he doesn't really have time for a slower move either, something like queen b3, for example. After queen f6, the bishop is attacked to some sort of pins, and the pawn is still attacked. You can't play c4, you can't play knight bd2, so I think Black's doing okay here. e3, there's plenty of fine moves here. One might be a5, trying to take on b4, using the fact that the c3 pawn is pinned and can't take back, and a3 doesn't help, because after takes, both pawns are pinned. Also, if b5 is in this position, Black can simply take on c5 with the knight, and he's got a kind of a bigger share of the center. That seemed more than sufficient to me, but another idea might be to play g5 and try to attack the bishop a bit, some bishop g3, h5 maybe, and try to generate some play. And if they play h4, something like knight takes g3 and g4, and one of those knight moves, maybe bring the bishop to h6 and try to attack some weak pawns, although I don't think this is completely necessary. I thought a5 was more than sufficient. So that's basically how to beat c takes c5 in such a fashion. You're not going to beat it, but I mean, I'll at least get an okay position. So the main idea though is to play after knight c6, e3. Now here, I would advocate the move queen to b6. So, white's whole plan was to try to create a solid dark square structure, but first to get his c1 bishop outside the pawn chain. But now he's sort of starting to feel the weaknesses of the c1 bishop being outside the pawn chain. This pawn on b2 is under attack now. So white doesn't really want to play b3, because usually when black takes on d4, white wants to take back with the e-pawn to try to keep a really solid structure, open the e-file. But in this case, if he takes with the e-pawn, you kind of see that this c3 pawn is backward in the long run. And while this isn't enough to give black an advantage or anything like that just yet, it certainly means that there's going to be some play. For example, now bishop to g4. In general, you want to develop the bishop before you play e6. So now let's say bishop d3, e6, knight b d2. I'm just trying to make some natural looking moves. Castle, castle. And now normally a normal plan might be something like h3. And usually white prefers if black has the bishop still inside the pawn chain, but a normal plan might be something like queen c2 now, to try to eventually put the knight on e5, because the e5 square is sort of a soft spot. But here it runs into a move like rook a c8. And okay, knight b4 is always in the air, which would be sort of a pain. And the fact that white's really feeling the pain of the pawn not being on b2. This pawn on c3 is a clear target. And white doesn't really have any, amazing, sparkling initiative, so to speak, at the moment. So I don't think black should be too worried here. This looks like maybe a slightly more pleasant position for black. But usually they won't play a move like b3. But then you think to yourself, well, what will they play? Their b2 pawn is hanging. They've got to do something about it. I should point out that if you make the mistake of playing queen b6 first here, this is why queen b6 is actually okay here. This is why e3 is a better move order, in my opinion. If you play queen b6 in this position, white has a strong move in knight to c3, which is very strong. It develops some pieces and sort of says, okay, I spent all my moves developing. Well, you're going to make a little queen sortie here, and there's some kind of maybe knight a4 or knight b5 will be obnoxious. So knight b5, and now knight c7 is an issue, and there's maybe some good chances to trap the queen here. So, yeah, this looks kind of obnoxious after something like rook to b1. So, going back, I think it's better to play knight c6 first. White certainly wouldn't want to play knight c3 here, because then the position will be very different. Black won't have wasted time with his queen, and white will probably start to feel the pain of the c-pawn being stuck. For example, something like bishop to g4, bishop to e2. Let's say even bishop takes f3, take, and e6. Suddenly, this pawn on d4 looks very vulnerable, and white would really much rather have a setup where his white-squared bishop were on d3, and his knight on c3 were on f3, and his pawn on c2 were on c3. So, but all of his pieces don't really make sense right now, so I think black looks to already have a more pleasant position. But after the main point, c3, queen b6, the only real ways to defend the pawn are to move the queen. So there's queen c2, queen c1, and queen b3. I think queen c2 is clearly the worst option, because black has sort of a surprising move here, bishop f5, which develops with a gain of tempo. And white can't take, because after queen takes b2, the position looks to be lost, because white will lose the rook. For example, something like bishop e2, very important move now, e6. If white were to black were to take the rook after queen c2, he would get his queen trapped and probably be lost. So, but e6 first, forcing the queen to a different post. If queen d3, there's always c4. And it looks like the rook will be trapped and white will not be able to trap the black queen. So that would be very bad. Otherwise, queen c2 completely loses its sense. And that would make it sort of seem like a silly move. So we're really going to spend most of our time on queen c1 and queen b3. So if queen b3, Let me just go to the position real quick. I think black's best move is to play c4. So the idea is now if white takes on b6, black will recapture. And he will play for b5 to b4. And I think this position seems quite pleasant for black if he can manage to play b5, b4. Let's say white plays some move like knight bd2, b5, a3. No, you can still play b4 here. Takes, because this pawn on a3 is pinned to the rook on a1. So, I'm sorry, let's go here. Let's say white plays rook c1, knight back to c6, bishop e2, e6. This is very important. If you get this structure, you should keep the white squared bishop inside the pawn chain. It's kind of a strange thought at first because it looks so passive there, but it really is needed to defend the pawns, and it can often get chased if it goes to f5 by something like knight to h4, or it'll make white's counterplay with e4 come with tempo. But okay, something like this, and now b5. Black wants to play for b4 eventually. And this looks like quite a pleasant position for black. He's got more space on the queen side, and white doesn't really have any super amazing prospects. So white usually tries to prevent this with a move like a knight to a3 here. First of all, I think actually even exchange sacrifice on a3 followed by knight to e4 is extremely interesting. I'm not sure objectively how amazing it is, but okay, the c3 pawn is now hanging. So probably rook c1 and then e6, maybe, or bishop f5 first, followed by e6 and hitting the a3 pawn. And it seems that black certainly has some interesting play, although I don't feel it should quite be enough. But a simple move here like e6, and if knight b5, I think a move like rook to a5 is very strong. So you're attacking the knight and asking it where it wants to go. If a move like a4, there may even be some sort of knight a7 trying to really undermine the knight. If b4, we could probably even sacrifice the exchange on b5 and play a position like this one where there's a lot of compensation, of course, and white has to worry about discovered checks he can't avoid. So I think that would be totally acceptable for black. And this whole space on the queenside thing will be annoying for white. So white could play a move like knight c2, and then after b5, play a3. And now note that b4 is basically unplayable because the knight protects the rook, so we can simply take the pawn. But the knight also looks really bad on c2, so I think this would be a good time to, I think, grab the bishop pair with knight to h5. And I think at this point, black looks to have maybe not necessarily a better position, but good chances of playing for an advantage. I think maybe we'll be able to play some sort of knight a5 to b3. He'll get the bishop pair, maybe e6, e5 at some point, play in the center. So I think this looks very promising. But mainly what will happen is white will now retreat the queen to c2. You might say, but then bishop f5 gains a tempo. Well, you're right, but after queen c1, we see a big difference in the previous position, and that's that the pawn is not on c5 anymore. Black doesn't have the option of playing c takes d4 and trying to use the c file. So if this position were to happen, I think white has less to worry about immediately because of opening things up. But at this point, I do think black does have certainly a playable game. For example, e6, knight bd2. So white would like to play b3 if he could, to try to open some lines on the queen side and improve his pawn structure. So here black plays a strong move, queen a5. His idea is to meet b3 with bishop a3, which would probably win the game. And if b4, okay, even retreating the queen is probably just fine, but I think both sacrifices on b4 look quite promising. Something knight takes b4, bishop takes b4, for example. Black will have two very strong pawns, bishop c3, knight e4. These moves are already hanging over white's head. Bishop takes b4 is similarly powerful after something like knight takes b4 and knight to d3 check, knight to c2 check, all this coming in. Again, because black has all 8 pawns, it's hard for white to use his extra piece, and black's pawns look very powerful. So both of those look at least playable. And okay, if white plays a move like bishop e2, I think it's important to play h6 here, not to allow knight h4, but something like castles, bishop e7. Black seems to have a certainly quite playable position here. He'll play for b5 to b4 and play on the queen side. I think that he really shouldn't have anything to worry about. White doesn't have any amazingly strong looking attack. So lastly, I'd like to look at queen c1 directly in this position. But I think after, let's say, bishop to f5, knight bd2, e6, something like this, castle, castle. White doesn't really have the activity he normally has, or the solidity. Black can very easily play along the c file, and White's queen certainly looks a bit misplaced on c1. It's hard for White to connect his rooks. So, and if something like knight h4, Black shouldn't be too worried. Even a move like bishop g4, f3, bishop h5. If White plays g4, he's really opening himself up a bit. And Black's quite likely to achieve e5 at some point. So I wouldn't be too worried for Black's safety here. And okay, White has opened up his king side a bit, and while he has the bishop pair, the position remains closed, and Black's dark squared bishop still looks very nice. I think Black has very little to worry about here. He seems to have a certainly playable position, and can maybe play for an advantage later on if things work out in his favor. So, also I should point out, he's actually threatening c takes d4 followed by knight takes d4. If White were to play a move like a3, I think this would be very strong. Because we can take with check and then pick up the bishop. And I should point out it also doesn't help to take this way because bishop e3, which looks nice with the pin, is comfortably met by knight takes e2 check. Black wins. So going back, I think that Black certainly has a playable position in this case. He can play for c takes d4 and rook c8, and then maybe a minority attack with b5, b4. There's many things he can do, and I think Black has certainly a fine playable position there. So I think that another sort of similar line starts with bishop g5 in this position. But here I think knight e4 is a strong move, and after bishop f4, c5, something like e3, knight c6, c3, queen b6. I think this version is a little bit better for White than the previous one, when the knight was on f6, because when White plays knight bd2, usually he'll be able to exchange some stuff. But okay, say something like queen b3, c4, maybe queen takes b6, and now knight bd2, and White will be able to exchange some pieces off, which should at least help somewhat. But even still, something like b5 here. And I think Black certainly has a playable position. Maybe White tries to play e4 really quickly, but after e6, the pressure doesn't seem to be enough in Black's center to really cause him serious concern. Maybe bishop e2, b4. If bishop f3, takes, and many moves, but maybe a move like bishop a3 is interesting. Even a move knight e7 is, well, that's kind of a sad move, so we'd rather not play it. But yeah, this position seems entirely acceptable after like bishop a3 maybe, and takes. We can take on we can play bishop b2. We'll take on c3, take on d4, and okay, we can also think about taking on a2. Black looks to be totally fine. So, although I think this is maybe a slightly better version for White. Also, after e4, b6, Black doesn't have any absolute need to play b4 right away if he doesn't want to enter such a position. He can even play a move like d takes e4 or knight takes e4 and play this position here. It's because, okay, maybe play b6 and shadow the bishop. It's not so clear how White's going to really proceed. I certainly don't think he has an advantage. So this seems totally fine for Black as well. The only thing you really have to be careful of is if you play a move like bishop f5 here, you always have to worry about something like takes, and bishop c7, which will win a pawn. That's why we play c4 first, to block the bishop, so the b5 is possible. And okay, I think if this could happen, White would have some advantage, but luckily we're not allowing it. So I think that basically covers how to play against bishop f4 and bishop g5 systems here, and hopefully you'll be able to use them so that these people who write books on why you should play the London system or the Collet system and how it's so easy to play and this will improve your chess. Hopefully this video will help put those authors out of business, because I find that their approach to chess is somewhat unpleasant to deal with if you don't know what to do, and also very unprofessional in the sense that they're giving up any chance of fighting for an advantage with the white pieces on the third or fourth move. So that was part 1 of this series. Part 2, I'll go over some other attacking systems against d5, sort of the Stonewall type and the Collet type, sort of, and after that I'll start looking where black plays an Indian system with knight f6. So until then, this is Sam Shanklin signing off.